What's up world, it's the Javelin Breakdown. I'm really excited that you've purchased this Javelin approach video course. It has everything I know about developing an approach, so I'm really excited to see how it helps you and your throwers succeed on the runway. So this video has a number of sections. We're going to start by talking about some of my favorite exercises for just developing an ability to move, and so they hit some of the challenge areas where either injury or just an imbalance or weakness exists that's going to affect your running, so share some of my favorite exercises for that. And then we're going to talk about some running drills that don't involve the javelin. So I like to say that your ability to run with the javelin is going to be limited by your ability to run without it, and so developing just general movement quality without it is going to be a big place to start. And then running with the javelin, obviously there's a lot of drills, a lot of things that kind of work through all the components of the approach, and then once we've done that we can put it together. And then there's a couple other items I'll touch on, but that's the main structure, so let's get into it. So we're going to get started with our first section, going through some exercises that hit challenge points, weaknesses, imbalances, and whatnot. And so just like to have a great race car, you need a great engine, you need suspension, you need the right tires. There's all these components. In the same way in the body, we want to make sure that our feet, our shins, our knees, our hips, all these different components are ready to rock and roll. And so, shin splints, or weak ankles, or knee pain. There's all of these things sometimes that can hold us back. And so there's a couple exercises I found that made a big difference for me. So I want to share those with you. And so maybe they're helpful to you. And so please share them with your coach, your PT, your trainer, and see if they'd be a good fit for you. This isn't all encompassing. This isn't my background. I just want to share with you some of the exercises that have been helpful for me. And you can give them a try if you'd like. For the feet, one of the easiest things to do is barefoot walk. I try to barefoot walk as much as I can outside of training. So I'll take the dog outside to play in my bare feet. I stay barefoot in the house. If I can warm up in my bare feet before whatever it is that I'm doing training-wise, I do that as well. Feet are the foundation, the contact point of the runway, and so they need to be strong and springy. And so being in your bare feet as opposed to shoes that are going to give you that support, being in your bare feet is going to challenge you and help develop that strength there. A point of caution with the bare feet is just don't overdo it, don't do too much too soon. And so that, moderation would be the key here. And so maybe pick one thing, whether maybe your warm up to your workout, or if you have a pet, like, if you have a dog to take outside, pick one thing that you're like, okay, I'm going to be in my bare feet for that, and challenge myself in that way. And over time, you can build that volume and strengthen the feet that way. The next exercise is the tibialis raise, and so I've had some shin issues when doing a lot of jumping, but I haven't had shin issues for a little while because of doing tibialis raises. And so there are a number of progressions for this exercise, whether you're doing it against the wall without some kind of tool, or you build a tibialis bar or purchase one. It can make a really big difference in strengthening the feet, the ankle, and the tibialis muscle that runs along the calf, and that just has basically eliminated my shin splints, in addition with some other exercises. So highly recommend you give it a try. The next exercise is the backward sled walk. This and the tibialis raise have been made very popular by Ben Patrick, so you can check out his Instagram if you haven't heard of him. He's got a lot of really great information out there. So the backward sled walk really targets the leg muscles that support the knee, kind of gives a wall sit level burn in the legs, a little bit of a pump, and I feel really good afterwards. And so I try to do those before my training sessions, and walking on a treadmill is effective as well. And in fact, that's usually what I do. And so I have a treadmill that I just have turned off, and I set up like you see here, and I get that work in. Doing just a few minutes of that makes a big difference. The last exercises I want to show are ways to hit your hip flexor. So you can do a seated leg lift, which doesn't require any equipment. It's nice to have something to lift your leg over as a challenge. You can put weight underneath your foot, a dumbbell or a plate, and strap it there with either different tools you can purchase, or a belt or some kind of band, as well as a band that you could put on a rack and do kind of this laying down movement like you see here. So all of these are going to get into your hip flexor and give you quite a burn. And so the hip muscles don't always get the love that they need, and that can be a common weak point. So like I said, these are just a couple of the exercises that I use to hit my problem areas, and so maybe they'll be helpful to you. Share with your coach, your PT, trainer, and see if those are a good fit for you, so that you can be, conditioned ready for these running drills and developing that approach. So now we're going to talk about general running drills. So like I said, your ability to run without the javelin is going to have a significant impact on your ability to run with it. So we want to elevate this to be able to elevate that, right? So we're gonna get into a couple drills that I really like. And so your sprinters, your jumpers, your hurdlers, everybody else is already gonna be doing these. And so throwers don't always get in on these, and I highly recommend, if throws coaches out there listening, have all your throwers, discus, shot, everybody. It's gonna challenge your coordination and your ability to just connect things. And so it's gonna make you a better athlete, even if you're not a javelin thrower on the runway. But for us javelin throwers especially, it's gonna make a big difference. And so I'm gonna start with, I'm sure you've heard the A skip and the B skip, but there's a progression before that that can make a big difference, the march. And so we're gonna start with that A march. And so that simplifies things, and then we can build to the skip. So what does the march look like? Well, with all of them, we want to dorsiflex the foot. And so what does that look like? So plantar flexed is going to be here, like I'm going to kick a soccer ball. But dorsiflexed, right, toe curling towards the shin. So that's going to create a strong position so that when I meet the ground, I'm going to apply force. We want to apply force to the ground. The ground is not applying force to us. We want to apply force to the ground. And so having a loose ankle is not good. So dorsiflexing, okay, we want to lift the knee, and we're going to want our arms to be swinging in coordination. And so when that right knee has lifted, right, we're going to have that right arm has driven back and this left arm is swung up, and that's happening from the shoulder, right? And so you should be relaxed and letting this action happen like this. So the march is simpler than the skip. And so quite simply, march. Think of soldiers moving, right? And so what I'm looking to do is apply force to the ground, maintain that dorsiflexion, have posture so that that force is being distributed through the whole body and not in awkward positions where one part of my body is dealing with more force than the other, right? And so that march is relatively simple because I'm straight up and down. And then once you're able to move well that way, you can graduate to the skip. So the skip, so that skip starts to introduce a little bit of rhythm and whatnot. But the thing about the A variations is that that leg action is a piston, right? That's pretty much what's happening. But when we run, it's cyclical, right? And so this is happening. So that's what the B skip's for. But before we get to the skip, let's do that march, right? So let's find that action. So what's gonna happen is we're gonna cycle, let's dorsiflex, making contact, and then we cycle, make contact in that march. And again, that allows us to control things more because the skip kind of is moving at a certain level, and so we dial it back and be really precise at the march level. So now that we've done the march, we can graduate to the skip. So we're introducing that rhythm. And that rhythm, again, is so key because that's what's going to take us in the approach to the next level. So if you want to have that great approach on the runway, you've got to build these foundational movement patterns at this level. So now that we've looked at the march and skip for both those, I think we can run a little bit, right? And so underrated is quality running. 20, 30 meters to start, and you can build up to even doing, 100 meters. And so your ability to just move at a nice clip with good mechanics, good rhythm, balance, coordination, that's gonna make a big difference. If you can't do that well, how are you supposed to accelerate down the runway carrying a 600 or 800 gram spear, draw it back, and move into your penultimate, right? And so underrated, it's just running. So in addition to the B variations and getting some work just running, there are some other kind of combinations that offer a challenge from a coordination perspective that are useful. So the alternating fast leg, double left, double right repeated, and everybody's done karaoke. And if done intentionally, that can also be useful. So I'm going to show those here now. So with all those exercises, we want to maintain those positions we talked about in terms of our posture, in terms of dorsiflexion and whatnot. And so applying those through your movement is going to make a difference. You're going to be a better athlete. And then when you take those to the next section here with the javelin, it's going to make a big difference. And so trying to run, like I've said, with the javelin before you've done some of that work, or at least doing this work and the javelin work, it's going to make a difference, because just trying to jump to a big long approach before you can move well without it, it's going to make it really hard. So we've done a number of running drills, but it's time for my favorite one, crossovers. You heard me right. You can do crossovers without the javelin. And so what this does is simplifies what needs to be done. You already know how to do this, right? We went over this, and so the arms are going to continue to move like that, but we're going to set our upper body up perpendicular to the throwing direction, right? So if I'm running that way, I have my chest oriented towards the camera, and then that front leg is going to have a pulling action, that back leg is going to have a pushing action, but like I said, the arms don't need to carry a javelin, the front arm doesn't need to have anything going on just yet, because there's no javelin. We can really focus on what's happening here. And so getting used to that pull and that push is going to take time, and so this drill allows you to focus on that. Because when we run, our feet are just going to come down, and that right foot and that left foot and that right foot, it's all doing the same thing. Boom, 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 right? Crossovers has a different rhythm and a different feel. And so being able to focus on creating that and not worry about carrying an 800 gram or 600 gram spear and coordinating the positioning of that, focusing on what's happening here, I think is a really, really good place to start. And so again, we pull off that front leg, we push off that back leg, and then there's sort of this moment of delay. And then we come back down and pull off that front leg and push off that back leg, right? Whereas when we run, there's not this moment of delay. There's step, 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 step. Whereas with the crossover, it's pull and then push, and then pull and then push. And as we accelerate, things happen faster, but there's this moment in between that creates the rhythm, right? And so when you're watching these here, see if you can see that, see if you can sense that, right? There's a difference between running and the rhythm of the crossovers. And so getting a feel for that rhythm and creating it with the pulling action of the front leg and the pushing action of the back leg is really, really key. And so working without the javelin allows you to focus on that. Now, one note with this drill, it's really great. You can do the no javelin crossovers with other coordination variations. So double left, double right, penultimate. So things that I'm going to show you in a little bit with the javelin, but you can always come back and do those without it. So we've done a number of running drills without the javelin. It's time to add the javelin into the mix. So I think a natural transition here is to just cover crossovers with the javelin, because we just talked about what the crossover action looks like without it. And so we have the pulling action of the front leg, the pushing action of the back leg. We have our upper body perpendicular to the throwing direction, but our arms are moving like this. So what changes now is that back arm, that throwing arm, is going to drift into position with the javelin. So what's that position look like? Well, there is some variance in the community in terms of what's best, and I think from athlete to athlete you'll find different things can work. I'm a big fan for beginners of having a level carry, so parallel to the ground, and so the javelin from tip to tail, parallel to the ground, it's all at the same height, arm, shoulder, hand, elbow, shoulder, all in line together, right? So I'm level right here. Now for me personally, right now, I'm working with just an ever so slight angle. That's what I'm personally experimenting with right now. I've definitely done a parallel level carry for a long time. At the elite level, you'll definitely find there are people that have an even more extreme angle. Jan Zalesny had a little even more angle than I showed there. And so, you know, again, you're going to find variance. For beginners, I think something like a level carry is great because it's very easy to check, right? And so if you do a crossovers down the runway and then you stop and freeze, you can look back, see where you're at. For your teammates or coaches, maybe who don't have as much experience, they're standing on the side of the runway. They're not trying to figure out if your javelin's at the right angle. You know, they can just tell you tail up. If you're here and you start to do this, they can just say tail up. And you know, okay, just need to bring it up a bit. And so this is, it's pretty clear. And so it keeps your body all in line, and then you set the angle with some of the things that happen at the front of the runway. But that's kind of another topic, another video, different time. But so setting the javelin, it's going to be in a position like so, give or take a few degrees. And really important, it's definitely going to want to be close to your body. So what does that look like? Well, it's really hard to carry the javelin when it's away from your body, right? Your big muscles that are going to support and stabilize are over here. And so making your extremities do this work is ridiculous. And in addition, you're not going to be able to transfer energy out here, right? We want to deliver the javelin from a position here. So some athletes have crossovers where they're carrying the javelin like this, right? Some people call it a wrap, right? A rotational crossover setup. And that's not something I'm going to cover today. It's a pretty advanced technique. But for people with the mobility and athletic qualities to move down the runway like that can maximize levers and whatnot and make some things happen on the runway. But people have thrown far both with a rotational or wrap style carry as well as a linear carry. And so we're going to stick with the linear because it's more straightforward, especially for beginners. But either way, with the rotational or wrap, by the time they come to their block, the javelin needs to be straight. So where do we want to be? We want to be in the barrel is what I say. I think of a cannon or a musket in the barrel. And so when I look back, that javelin is along my body. That point is against my face. And so I want to keep it in this position. So through my crossovers, no matter what's happening, I'm slow, fast, penultimate, it's going to be locked into this position. I want to keep it constant. So that is the throwing arm. The chest staying perpendicular to the throwing direction. So if I'm throwing towards the camera, as you can see, you can't see my logo, right? I'm in this position here. And then this front arm, it's my left hand since I'm a right-handed thrower, right? When we were doing our no javelin crossovers, our arm moved like this. So what's going to happen is it's going to drift up and it's going to work in an action like this, okay? So I want you to see that when I pull with that front leg, what happens is my arm comes across. Okay, so I'm going to walk through here. And so my arm comes across. It's at this end range of motion upon the left leg impact. And when that right leg's coming down, it opens. So I'm in this position here. So it's working like this. Okay, now for me, I tend to go like this. There are some athletes that have a little more of like a conductor circle. And you can see my hand kind of a little loose in the wrist, right? And so there's variation in how people make this happen, but generally speaking, it's going to be counterbalancing and moving somewhat like this, okay? And so finding how that feels for you, again, there's some variation, but that's generally the movement that's going on there. And it's really key that you're in control of this arm because this arm has a big say in where the chest goes. And so keeping this arm in control so that when you get to the front of the runway, you're able to set your body right. Having control here is really key. So we know what the legs do. We know what the throwing arm and the non-throwing arm are doing. So we want to put it together. So a great place to start is just trying to go 20 meters or so at a constant speed with a nice pulling action, a nice pushing action of the legs, the upper body, to borrow Curtis Thompson's cue, the word quiet. Okay, so this upper body throwing arm is quiet. It's in a good position and it stays there as the powerhouse, the legs do the work. And then we have that counterbalancing action of that front arm, okay? So just covering 20 meters or so at a constant speed, trying to maintain your positions. All right, so now you've done crossovers at a constant speed. How about accelerating, right? Because when we're on the runway with our approach, we want to accelerate. That way we get to our peak horizontal velocity at the block. So practicing the acceleration with just crossovers is really, really important. Getting comfortable building speed with each step. But I understand that that's more challenging than a constant speed at a low intensity. So that's a great place to start. But once you get comfortable with that, add accelerating into the mixture. And as you get comfortable with that, accelerating from kind of pretty slow to just a little bit faster, you can start slow and build over the course of 20, 30 meters and go, pretty fast. Get to kind of the top end speed of your approach. Now you might be thinking, okay, I can do that. How can I make my crossovers more challenging? Well, I got some good drills, some variations for you. But another way that you can make them challenging is how you carry the javelin. So instead of actually holding it with the grip that you like, you can cradle it. So you see how my hands kind of create this little valley for the javelin to sit in, or I can open up my palm entirely and it just sits there. Okay, that creates a real challenge. And so now you're doing your crossover with this barely there grip. So your ability to coordinate and keep this upper body position set, and so I think the core in particular and keeping all this connected is really, really key. That forces you to just have that really dialed in. It's very challenging, but it's rewarding, because if you can run fast and stay in control, barely holding the javelin, then when it comes time to actually hold it and throw, it's way, way easier, right? And so you're kind of creating that just way more challenging than the actual thing is, and it makes the actual thing so easy. And this kind of leads me into one of the big things for me with the approach is I want it to be an autopilot activity when it comes time to competition season. I want it to be so easy to go down the runway. That way I can focus on other cues. And so adding things in like the open palm carry or the barely cradled carry allows you to get to that level where you're just so in control. It doesn't matter how difficult the variation, your positions are just solid. And then you get on the runway for the meet and it's easy. All right, so we just did crossovers. What are some other variations? Well, my favorite challenge variation is double left, double right, okay? So what does that look like? And like I said earlier, you can do this without the javelin, but I'm gonna show you with. So the double left, double right involves taking 2 steps with your left and 1 step with your right. So that's the double left, as the name says. Left, right, okay? And so even though it's called the double left, it's actually focused on the right. It's focused on the pushing action, okay, for a right-handed thrower. It would be the opposite for a lefty, okay? Left, right, right. And so you're seeing my right leg snap down and push. And so that's what's gonna propel me forward. The opposite, double right, right, left. You're seeing that left leg snap down and pull. And so your ability to cover, say, 20 meters with a quiet, in control upper body with the javelin, while your legs are doing this challenging rhythm, I'll tell you what, a lot of people struggle the first time they do it. But as they improve this, their ability to coordinate when they do their crossovers and push improves drastically. And so emphasizing with the double left, that pushing action, that's what should make you go forward, right? The first 2 steps that left don't push you very far forward, but don't take you far forward, but then you push off the right and you move. And so left step, you maybe go a couple inches forward, and then when you push off that right, you really move a bit. Same thing, right foot, big left. And so being able to make that happen, again, a really great challenge variation, can be done with or without the javelin. You can also do it with like a med ball above your head. There's lots of ways you can explore that and whatnot, but just that coordination challenge there, super awesome. All right, so we've covered crossovers and the double left, double right. Now I want to show you the penultimate. The penultimate is the final step, the impulse step. And the reason that this impulse step is so important is that it creates the magic of the throw, in my opinion. So I'm going to briefly explain what's going on at the front of the runway. Again, this is kind of more getting into the mechanics of the throw, but it's important to understand for the approach and why the penultimate is so important. And so I like to think of the javelin as a pull, even though it's called a throw. I think of it as a pull, and it's a pull that happens off of a foundation, off of an anchor. And that anchor is our whole body, but in particular the left side for a right-handed thrower. And so what happens when we come to the end of the runway is that final front leg step is very powerful. It's the most powerful step, and that propels us almost off a very small skateboard ramp, right? And so we go off this ramp, out, up a little bit, but mostly out, right? And we cover ground, way more ground than we normally do with our crossovers. And that takes us through the air, and we're in this position. You see these super cool pictures. And then as the athlete comes down, they're going to make contact with their back foot, ideally in a position close to this, because this allows them to move into the block quickly. When that front leg is like this, they get in trouble because that decelerates them. So ideally we're hitting here, and we go from that back leg to that front leg very quickly. And the reason we want it to be quick is because that creates this dun-dun. And so that rhythm of the takeoff, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you're watching anyone or listening to a throw, do you hear that rhythm? That rhythm, that final 2, 3 action accelerates the delivery of the javelin, setting of the anchor, and the hip is going to react to the block, and that brings the upper body into position, this big stretch through the chest and the armpit and the shoulder, elbow, hand, and accelerates that transfer of energy from running down the runway, and that transfer of energy of the upper body movement against the foundation the body has created. So we go down with this hip action and the block, setting the anchor, energy out. All right, so that's a lot of information, but hopefully what you're seeing, right, is that we need to anchor to the ground, and we need to create that final rhythm of back leg to front leg quickly to accelerate all this and transfer the energy out into the javelin. Inefficiency, deceleration before the block, right, because the block is a deceleration, but it allows us to re-accelerate and transfer that energy. So any deceleration before that moment, right, like trying to take off for your penultimate like this with your foot way out front, or with your foot way behind you, that's not going to help you. So drilling the ability to take off that front leg and cover ground is really, really important. So how do we do that? Well, I like to start beginners with a 7-step or 3 crossover penultimate drill. So what does that look like? Well, for those of you that aren't familiar, you can count your steps a number of ways. Some people like to think of each crossover as 1 rep, right? So I'll do 2 crossovers. 1, 2. Okay? That was 2 crossovers. It's also 5 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And so you can count literally all the steps or the crossovers, different ways to think about it. So with a 7-step, that gives you 3 crossovers or 7 steps. And that allows you to get a little bit of speed behind you so that when you hit your penultimate, you're moving, it's a little more realistic, right? Because in an approach, hopefully we're having at least a couple crossovers. So it gives you kind of, you're already at 10 miles an hour or whatever, you know, you're already kind of going a little bit. So let me show you that.
So what'd you see there? You see me accelerate, 1 crossover, 2 crossover, and on that third, my left leg snaps down and I get a little bit of pop, right? It's definitely the most powerful of the steps. And it drives me up a little bit and out. And I maintain my position with the upper body. And as I come down, my back leg lands first, but then that front leg happens very shortly after. And so drilling the ability to float and fly through the air with that moment and create that rapid back to front contact, super, super important. Now I want to point out, when I had the Javelin, I maintained this position and decelerated like this, right? I kind of took little steps, kept my upper body in position. The reason I really like to do that is because I don't want to do my penultimate and just drop the Javelin. For me, the rep isn't over till I've stopped and I know my positions are good. And this is a great thing I like. You know, the athlete decelerates, they look back, check their positions, and they're looking around. And so that's just like another way to get more out of the drill and build good habits. Maintain your positions no matter what. And only after you're like, okay, the rep's over, you can, you know, leave this position. And so people that do their penultimate and then just drop the Javelin, not that it's wrong, but for me, it just kind of gets into an area I don't like in terms of habit formation. So for me, really like to maintain this carry through the rep and decelerate gradually, especially on a full approach, because there's just no reason to put extra stress on your joints by hitting a huge penultimate and stopping really fast. Take your time, decelerate over a number of steps. So you saw me do the 7, right? I really like that because it's just 1 rep. Very simple. 1 crossover, 2 crossover, penultimate. You decelerate and then you can repeat it. And so whether you do that at the front of the runway and just do 1 rep, or you do it like on the track and you go down, you know, 100 meters and you do like several of them, but there's, you know, 5 or 6 seconds in between, right? It allows a beginner athlete to really focus on just 1 rep at a time, and each rep build and have a strong penultimate, a strong front leg pull-off action, float through the air. When you come back down, you've got that back leg to front leg, decelerate, okay? So that's the 7. I like that a lot. Another thing you can do is repeat impulses, repeat penultimates. And so once you're comfortable kind of doing 1, you understand what it is, you can do them repeatedly in between a crossover. So you'll do a penultimate and then a crossover, and then a penultimate and then a crossover. And so you've got 1 action and 1 rhythm followed by the opposite. And so your ability to execute that is another drill. So over 20, 30 meters or so, you can do that. Note, again, the rhythm change between the crossover and the penultimate, the pulling of that front leg, and I cover ground, I elevate a little bit off the skateboard ramp sometimes, as I tell athletes, driving out, and I meet the ground, back foot to front foot, and then I have my crossover in between. Another way to make this more challenging or add in just like helpful visual for the athlete is to have mini hurdles or cones that they have to go over. And so again, that provides that visual of covering ground. A cue that a lot of people like to use is jump the puddle, right? And so imagine that there's a puddle that you have to go over. And so in a normal crossover, you'd probably step in the puddle. But if you put your foot ever so slightly behind the puddle, when you take off for your penultimate, you should cover the entire puddle, go over it, right? And so that's that covering ground of the penultimate. Additionally, instead of cones or hurdles, you could use bumper plates or other low box items, and you could step on that box for that front foot contact to take off. And the reason that that's helpful is that adds a little bit of height just because the athlete's stepping up to take off for the penultimate, and that creates an even higher penultimate and they drive farther out. And so that creates just a longer moment, and that forces a lot of patience and develops an even higher level of control for the athlete in that moment. Because as you go faster and create a more powerful penultimate, it requires more patience and more coordination, control the positions. And so you don't want to get into those positions going at your full approach and not be capable of holding them. And that's kind of where I'm at right now in my prep. So it's January right now. And so I'm, getting ready for my season opener, hopefully at the end of March. And I'm just not quite in control at those high speeds in terms of doing an approach. When I'm floating through that penultimate, my body's just not quite ready to hold those. So I've been doing a lot of penultimates off of bumper plates, because that's what I have available, because that gets me more into that position, the float time of that moment, It's more realistic for me. And so that's forcing me to develop that control, develop the comfort level to move through that moment and not lose position and wait for the ground. And so having, low box, bumper plate, something like that, and laying them out repeatedly if you can to create a run where you take a penultimate and then an in-between crossover and then a penultimate and then in-between crossover, that can be a great way to build control given the strength and power, the challenge of maintaining positions of this kind of step. So hopefully through all this you understand the importance of the penultimate and why there are drills for working on it, because it is such an important step. So you need to be able to do crossovers to get to that moment, but your ability to execute the penultimate is so key. And you can accelerate down the runway all you want, but if you can't accelerate even more and then hit your block with all that speed, and when I say with all that speed, it can be a lot of speed or it can be not that much speed relative, but it's still faster than when you started, right? So if you start at 2 miles an hour and you get to 4, and then at your penultimate you get to 6, that's great, okay? So our ability to accelerate is important, crossovers are important, but that penultimate step creates that rhythm, creates the energy transfer, the magic of the throw, so it's very important that we drill that and get comfortable with it. All right, so we've covered a lot of stuff now. We are ready to do an approach that doesn't involve a straight run, because we have our crossovers and we have our penultimate. And for some of you, whether you're a multi-athlete and you're very limited on time, or you're a beginner in high school and you're going to try some of the other things I'm going to show after this, but you kind of, after reviewing all this, you're like, I'm just not there yet, but I want to have a good competition throw. What's the most optimal thing for me to do? And the answer to that is whatever is going to allow you to be at top speed in the penultimate, right? Hitting that block with peak horizontal velocity that you can control. That you can control is very key, because you can go blazing fast, but if you're not able to hold your positions and have good technique, it doesn't matter. And so for a lot of athletes, that means doing 2, 3, 4, 5 crossovers, and that's okay. All right, so I just want to show you how I would work with an athlete then to prepare for a competition. So what that would look like is I would want to go on the track, not the javelin runway. I like to get on the track, on the backstretch. And the reason for that is it doesn't give an athlete any indication of where they're at, and they're able to just move freely. And so if we decide they're going to take 4 crossovers, right? Then I have them practice and I say, okay, there's your starting point, just a random spot, on the backstretch in lane 3, and I want you to relax, set your position like you would in a competition, right? Put the javelin back, make sure you're in a good position, set your eyes upon your focal point. That's something I have my athletes do. And then tell them to do their 4 crossovers, hit their penultimate, float, and then decelerate gradually, okay? There's no foul line. It is just about the rhythm and the feeling, and I want them to just move and not worry about anything else. And once they're able to do that well, and since I've been doing this long enough, I generally can keep an eye on where they're starting and where they're stopping and have an idea that, okay, they're starting to be consistent. Once an athlete started to be consistent with where they're at on the track, you can get on the runway and you can try to measure out where they're going from. Now this is a lot easier with just a few crossovers because just the distance isn't so great. But what that would look like is, if this is the foul line, so this camera is on an angle to my backyard, but I'm going to set up my runway square like this, okay? If this is the foul line, what I'd have my athlete do is take a few steps forward to get to a position like this. And the reason is that when an athlete hits their penultimate and blocks, ideally, they're able to transfer their energy well, and that's going to send them over their block into their recovery. So whether you take 2 steps or come over and take 1 step, either way, stopping before the foul line, I want my athlete to have a foot or so of room, 1.5 feet or so of room. Because what happens when they hit a really nice penultimate? They're going to go a little bit further, they're going to get thrown over their block a little bit more and get a lot closer to that foul line. So I like to leave in a little bit of breathing room, because giving up a foot, 1.5 feet on a throw consistently is, to me, not a big deal when you have that big PR. And you can always make adjustments for when you're in a situation where you're willing to gamble because you're trying to win a dual meet or whatever it is. But generally, leave a little bit of room. So I'll have them start their approach, 1 meter or so off of the foul line, maybe more depending on the athlete. And then I'll have them do their crossovers down the runway the opposite direction. And I'll be standing roughly where I think they'll stop to be able to see, okay, that's where they landed off their penultimate. Okay, so I took off and landed, so here's my spot. So I'd put that cone down and I'd say, all right, go back and do it again. So I'd have them come back here, right? They've got their javelin, and they do it again. Nice and consistent, landed at this spot. All right, let's see where I'm at. I'm gonna have the athlete now come from their mark towards the foul line, same deceleration strategy. All right, so I got a little bit close. I did go a touch faster, and I know that, I felt that. The athlete might not. That's your job as the coach then to see. So maybe we'll back it up a little bit. And so then it becomes this game. But working on the track first, right, on the back stretch is what I like to do. I think that's a great place to start because it takes away this visual that, you know, kids tend to clamor up because they, out of their bottom field of view, see that line and they don't want to cross it. And so it's like, eliminate that. Have them run on the back stretch and get comfortable just going at the speed that they can control, right? Express good movement, and then bring it here. Hopefully they're a little more confident. They've already done a bunch of reps on the track. You bring them to the runway, and again, you ignore the foul line initially, and you move in reverse where there's not a visual, and you get a good sense of how much ground they're covering, and then you have them move toward the foul line, and you get that mark. And then at the meet, you can roll your tape measure out, put down your mark, and take an approach, decelerate gradually, and see where you're at. And you can always make adjustments. So that's how I would handle an approach that's built with just crossovers. Now we're going to talk about the straight run, because we're getting ready to build an approach that involves running with the javelin, drawing it back, entering our crossovers, and then our penultimate moment. So what does that look like? So first we got to talk about how to run with the javelin when we're just running with it, moving like this, okay? What does that look like? Well, we want to be really efficient with carrying it. We don't want to waste any extra energy with how we hold the javelin and move it, okay? I like to keep the javelin still. I like to have it supported by my elbow and shoulder, right? Set up like so. Some people have a very high carry and the javelin can get out and whatnot. For most of you, recommend keep it really simple. Javelin is parallel or slightly pointed down when you're at the back of the runway getting ready to start, okay? Elbow is pretty much underneath my hand. They got my shoulder set up, and the javelin's going to stay still and relaxed. There are people that bounce the javelin and do different things. These are elite athletes who are already really good at the fundamentals, and they're finding that one other little thing here and there that helps them get just a little bit more out of their technique. You're welcome to try them, but they're not going to make or break your throw. Well, I should say this. They're not going to make your throw, right? But they could certainly break it by just creating an unnecessary challenge and a waste of energy. So just something to think about. So that's why I'm a big fan of just right here, okay? And our non-throwing arm is going to do what it does when we normally run. So when my right knee is up, my arm is up, okay? And when my left knee is up, my arm is back, okay? This arm doesn't get to do that because it's carrying the javelin, right? But this is what's happening, okay? See how comfortable I am doing this? My upper body is chilling. The javelin is chilling. But my arm is moving here, and I've got my feet moving, creating nice, strong action to the ground. All the things we talked about with our base running drills without the javelin at the beginning of this video. And so your ability to cover ground, both again, constant and accelerating with the javelin is really key. So practice that. Practice your straight run at a constant speed. Can you be in control? Can you accelerate? Can you be in control? It's pretty simple, but again, you're adding this new thing in, and so it can be challenging. So take your time, don't get discouraged, work at it till you can be comfortable moving at a decent speed over the course of 20 meters or so. All right, so we know how to run straight with the javelin. How do we go from straight to crossovers? So that's that transition. So what does that look like? Again, I'm a big fan of an efficient transition, nothing dramatic. There are lots of ways to make the transition, and you'll see in elite athletes the variations, but I think for most beginners, the simplest thing to do is have the javelin, again, using the word quietly, it just drifts back into position, no frills, okay? So my javelin is here, and it is gonna just draw back into position. And so right here, what I'm doing, letting that javelin drift back, my upper body is going from facing the camera to not, and my non-throwing arm is going to come up into position just like so. So doing this here, getting comfortable with that drawback action, right? This is a great place to start, getting comfortable. When you draw it back, check yourself. Am I where I want to be? No. I'm drawing it way too low. That's not what I want. So then I adjust. That's more like it. Okay, and so that's a great place to start, getting comfortable with that. Now, if you can do that, you can try to draw it back while moving. Now, it's important to understand what that looks like. So as a right-handed thrower, when you take your drawback step with the left foot, you can begin to draw it back. You can begin to do what I just showed. And then your right foot's going to come down. We want to be complete with the drawback before that left foot comes down again. Okay? So I'm going to show that here. I'm going to walk. So you're going to see left foot, begin the drawback process, right foot continuing the drawback process, completed the drawback process before that left foot meets the ground. Begin, complete before that. And so what that does is that allows us to be set in position so that upon that next step, we are entering it with intention and can focus on this pulling action of the front leg and not worrying about finishing the drawback. So we want to finish that drawback quickly, and we don't want it to take away from our ability to move forward. So just try that, okay? Just like I did. Drawback complete, and we should be there. And once you can do that, you can add steps. So I'm going to take 3 steps, 1, 2, 3, and on that third step, begin the drawback, okay? So I'm going to just take a set of steps beforehand. So I have step, drawback, complete, okay? So I'm going to draw it back on 3. I'm going to count it out like that. I think that'll be easier. And I'm going to be done before 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, done, 5. Okay, so try that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and so if you can walk through it like that, then you're in a good place. Now you can try to do it with a little more of a run. Okay? And so I would encourage you to try it out just like you did with some steps beforehand. Again, because that's realistic. 1, 2, 3, 4, done. I'm able to say done before I say my 5th step. 1, 2, 3, 4, done. 1, 2, 3, 4, done. So your ability to transition before that next left foot comes into place is really important. So once you're able to do that over just a couple steps, you're really ready to just try and approach and put things together, at least moving from straight run transition to crossovers. So now that we've kind of covered how to transition the javelin, you're ready to try it with a more full approach setup. So at this point, I'm just going to talk through my philosophy on how to think through the full approach. We have to think about how many steps we're taking in the straight run, okay? And that can be how many times your left foot, as a right-handed thrower, your left foot hits the ground. And so I can count 1, 2, like that, or you can count every step, okay? I find it easiest to just count left foots. So that's how I'm going to refer to things here. So sometimes athletes take 3, 4, 5 steps with their left foot, and so they're taking 6, 8, or 10 total steps before they transition, okay? And then when they have that transition, they have that transition crossover, and they might have that plus 1 more crossover, and then the penultimate, so 3 crossovers. Sometimes they have 4 crossovers. So there's a number of ways to build an approach. I think it's going to be really easiest to start with a simple staple, okay? 3 steps with your left, or 6 total steps into 3 crossovers, okay? So what's that look like? You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay? That's all we're going to do. 3 steps, 6 total steps into 3 crossovers, transition, a little more, penultimate, okay? So I want to show you that here. In the same way as our just crossover approach, I want my athletes to work on this on the back stretch of the track, where there's no foul line, because we don't want to be worried about anything making us stop before we need to. I want my athletes to run free and uninhibited, right? And so just entering that flow state, moving at the speed they think is comfortable, not having a foul line or anything that they're used to, and from a kind of telling where they're at standpoint. I don't want them to be thinking about any of those things. I just want them to move. So I'm going to show you 3 left foots, right? 3 lefts into 3 crossovers, focusing on the transition, okay? I want that drawback to happen before that second crossover. So watch. Tell me if I do that. One, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? That's a great place to start. Real simple. Notice I'm in my backyard, so I'm kind of shortening how much ground I cover. But even then, you don't need to sort of run full tilt. I'm almost running in place, drifting forward ever so slightly, right? But I'm still getting up to a speed. Watch. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? That transition is seamless. Okay, so getting comfortable, being able to do that, and not take away from your crossovers, your ability to make that happen. Now, you did 3 lefts and 3 crossovers, right? And we did that on the backstretch. That doesn't mean that's what your full approach is going to be. I just think for most people, that's a great place to start. It's something you can do repetitions of. You know, if you're trying to practice your transition and you take 5 lefts into 4 crossovers, that's a few more steps. And over the course of several reps, that's a lot more steps. And so I think you're going to tire out a lot quicker. So something like 3 lefts into 3 crossovers is a really easy thing to do. And on the back stretch, you can do that over and over and over. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let the javelin swing down, bring it back up, repeat. And so you can do 3 or 4 full approaches on the back stretch to practice that transition and getting comfortable with that drawback. So 3 lefts into 3 crossovers, I think, is a great place to start. But now that you've done that and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with that, should I do more steps? That's a great question. So now that you've done the 3 lefts into 3 crossovers, you're comfortable making that transition, or you've done some similar variation, you're comfortable with that transition, you're asking yourself, okay, should I take more steps? How do I figure out, how far my approach is? I've just been on the track, I don't know where to start from. Again, we're gonna do the same thing we did with just the crossovers. And again, the most important thing is to be at peak horizontal velocity that you can control, so that when you hit your block, you're able to transfer that energy out into the javelin. And this takes practice, but it's better to just start slower and be in control and feel good and say, okay, I'm gonna just go a little bit faster. Just a little bit faster. So we're gonna try 3 steps into 3 crossovers to get our step here. Same thing. At this point, I'm gonna have the athlete come, give themselves room off of the foul line, okay? And then I'm gonna have them work backwards on the runway, making sure that they're still doing the same things they did on the track. They're moving well, accelerating, building towards the penultimate. All right, so that's where I'm at. Let's see what happens. Hit my penultimate, good position here, I have room to recover. So that's what you're looking for, is to create that. Again, whatever you worked on your transition with, you come to the runway, you give it a try, you run it back, you're giving yourself room, you see where you're at. Again, this is what you want to be doing in practice, so that at the meet, you're not worried about it, because you're going to come to the meet, you're going to know where to run your tape measure out to, you put your cone at that spot, you do in a run through, you see where you're at. So hopefully you feel confident about building an approach now. I've shown you drills that are just going to help you physically prepare for the approach, okay? And so strengthening your feet, strengthening your knees, your shins, these areas that tend to give us problems, right? I've given you drills to improve your general running mechanics, because running without the javelin should be easier and should be something that we develop to a high level so that our javelin running can meet that level, because our javelin running ceiling is going to only be as high, potential-wise, as our non-javelin running. And so we want to elevate both, be a well-rounded athlete. And then we have our javelin running drills. We're comfortable crossovers. We can hit our penultimate. We develop our straight run and our transition, and we're able to put it together seamlessly and create that nice energy transfer into the javelin, because the run is just building speed that we want to transfer out into that, right? And so again, we've covered these things. We've talked about how to then figure out your approach, right? And so you take a couple steps away from the foul line and run it back and see where you're at your penultimate. And when you make contact with that back foot, so take off, and as you begin to decelerate, that's the position you or your teammate or your coach is looking for. And so mark where they land after they've hit their penultimate, and that's where you want to put the cone. You can run it back. And by working on this in practice, we can get to that thing I talked about, that cruise control, where you are just so in control, so relaxed. You can go down the runway without a thought in your mind about what you need to do from an approach standpoint, because it is just automatic, right? You're on cruise control and you're able to focus on other things.
So now that you've concluded the javelin video approach, I want to offer a few closing thoughts. I'm going to try to answer a few things that I anticipate being frequently asked questions. But if you still have questions after watching this section, feel free to leave a comment, send me a message on Instagram, or email me at thejavelinbreakdown@gmail.com. So the first thing I want to address is what I think is the most important takeaway from this video. And that's that your approach should be repeatable and controllable. And so what I mean by that is that your approach is consistent. It's going to look nearly the same every time you do it, so that each throw you're contributing the same quality of approach, and it's controllable in that whatever your best technical execution is at the front of the runway, you're able to get close to that after you do this approach. And so if your approach is wicked fast, or if it's accelerating too quickly, or it's just long and drawn out and you're tired by the end, whatever it is, if it's negatively impacting what you do at the front of the runway and you throw better off of 7 steps, then that approach isn't serving you and it's not controllable. So repeatable and controllable. The approach is helpful, having a high horizontal velocity and transferring that into the impulse and into the javelin is great, but if you can't do that, then there's no point in doing it. So repeatable and controllable, I think that is huge. So that would be my opinion from this video. If you don't learn anything, please learn that I want your approach to be repeatable and I want it to be controllable. Some people might be wondering, I've heard of having a transition marker and running based on rhythm, and so you start from your start point and you don't count your steps, but you approach towards your marker in the middle of the runway or so, wherever it is, and that's kind of where you transition, and from that marker forward, that's where you do your crossovers, and that that's how much room you need to do your crossovers. So your start point to your middle point is just run with rhythm. Don't take a certain number of steps, don't count, just run with rhythm. And some people do that and it works for them, and that's great. I've tried it and I can see how it could work. I can also see how it won't work. And as athletes struggle to be consistent and hit that marker consistently and have controllable speed, or they might under accelerate. So at the end of the day, it's a usable strategy. It's just not a strategy I choose to employ right now. If I had an athlete struggle with counting, and I wouldn't be opposed to giving the rhythm-based approach a try, but the counting for me has worked, and so I'm going to stick with it. Like, my athletes are hitting the speeds I want them to, so I'm not worried about trying a different method at this time. So now I want to try to address the question of how do I use these drills? How do I implement them? How many do I do? It's really, it's a big question. And so the short answer is that there's not one method. There's not one, document that has the list and the order that you do the drills and the reps that you do them in, because every athlete is unique and has different challenges, has different strengths and weaknesses, and when it comes to running, their coordination, their ability to apply force and move well or not move well. And so you as a coach or as an athlete need to be able to evaluate, need to be honest and understand where they're at and then look at the drills, look at the tools in your toolbox and say, okay, they need more of this or they need more of that. And it can be challenging to kind of dose that properly, especially when you have a lot of athletes. And so sometimes you're kind of stuck using a cookie cutter program and you're like, okay, we're going to do these drills and this one's going to help her and this one's going to help him, but we kind of all just need to move through this because I just can't, give everybody their own custom thing and send them on their way. They just need too much help. So here's my recommendation on that front for you high school coaches. I like to do javelin approach work on the track. I like to use the lanes. If I have to use the grass or the high jump pad, you can, but the lanes are really helpful for that visual for the lines. And it allows me to kind of set kids in lanes based on what drills they need to be working on. And so I can be like, all right, lane 1 is so-and-so and so-and-so, and then so-and-so and so-and-so. And so distribute the athletes, and then I can just, as they go down and come back, I can be offering feedback and switching which drill they're working on. And by mid-season, they all know what all the drills are, and they're able to work on the ones they need to because I'm giving them those drills in real time. I'm able to see all the athletes as they work, but they're also not being singled out. They're working in groups based on what they're doing. We're not on the runway going one by one, and it's not like okay, so and so you do this one, okay, you do this one. It's the format of the backstretch I think is just really helpful, and it creates a little bit of camaraderie getting through the running drills. I know a lot of times javelin throwers can be a little bit about running, and so trying to push back on that and just create a fun environment of like, all right, this is going to positively impact your throwing, and so take a positive attitude towards it. We're going to work together to get through our running drills, and it's going to have a good impact. So that's how I like to work with high schoolers when I have a pretty big group. At the college level, when you have less athletes and you're able to specialize, and generally college athletes are committed, focused, and not going to deal with the same kind of challenges personality wise, or I'd hope not, as you would maybe at a high school level where there might not be cuts, and you got a wide range of commitment level there. I think my video does a good job of working from less technical to more technical, and so kind of use that generally as a barometer for like, okay, if my athlete is somewhere in the middle where like their running is like okay and their ability to run with the javelin is like then the dosage for them can kind of be fairly balanced. If you've got a really good athlete who their running drills are excellent, then you need to push them in the javelin running and push the difficulty of the javelin running drills, especially when it comes to whatever issue, whatever challenge they're facing as a thrower. If their impulse is a little low and is short, then working off of blocks to get elevation and control in their positions and things like that. Whereas maybe an athlete who's really just struggling with their running drills in general needs maybe some GPP work to just help them coordinate from the brain to their muscles and find kind of working in slow motion almost, and understanding like, okay, like that's firing this muscle, like that's what that contraction feels like. Okay, let's try this drill and think about that feeling. Another really helpful way to kind of jump into that is making games that involve running. And so it's things as simple as like having 2 lines and one team is one color and one team is another color, and you play tic-tac-toe and have to run out and place pennies or markers, and you come up with ways to get athletes to move, and you do some technical drills, some running drills before the games, and then you work into the games and encourage them to apply those principles. And it's just a way to get some work in, and without athletes knowing it, because they don't love running. So you gotta be careful with the games, but I think games make a big difference. Tag, capture the flag, all those things. And these are things that make most sense out of season from a risk standpoint, but they just make such a difference. And that's why I think my movement isn't too bad, is because as a kid I played outside so much, and so the volume of just barefoot play I had was pretty high. I don't think that that's the case for kids these days, so just a thought there. But yeah, so my answer to that question isn't the most straightforward. You need to understand where an athlete is at and implement drills that are going to target their weaknesses, and that can be challenging. If you are struggling to figure out what an athlete needs, you can pick up a breakdown or a video call, and we can take a look at it together, and I can provide some ideas, or drop a comment and describe what you got going on. I wish I had a more straightforward answer, but at the end of the day, it would be a disservice for me to say here's what you should do, because It just wouldn't be helpful. Thank you for watching this video through. If you've watched it all the way through, I thank you very much for your contribution to my watch time. That's awesome. Good luck with your season this year, and always remember to enjoy the journey.